All right, getting started. So it's only 7:01. I'm gonna maybe wait one more minute for folks to pop in. So this is my first time doing a Facebook slideshow live screen share class. And so this is a new process for me also. And I was hoping I could answer y'all's questions. So I'm not sure how that aspect of things will go, but I guess for now I will just start talking about some of these plants. And if you guys have questions at the end, you are more than welcome to message us over at Tillery on our Instagram. I respond to a lot of the messages there, so you can reach me there. So container gardening can mean a lot of things. It can mean houseplants. It can mean outdoor plants. And every plant grows outdoors somewhere. So I really like us all to start with that idea. So a big part of successful container gardening is knowing your plant's original environment. So, my name is Melissa Hagen, and I am the houseplant manager of Tillery Street Plant Company. And we are currently closed to the public, but maybe you have been there. You've seen our gift shop that one of our coworkers, Vinny, painted the flowers on the front of. And the cats, those are the managers over at Tillery. They pretty much run things, Rascal and Rasputin. And that's our gift shop. And we do a lot of things over there. So we have a lot of free classes. We try to find all sorts of folks to share their knowledge, and we've also hosted plant swaps, and obviously we had to cancel our spring swap, which was very sad, but it's really exciting when we do have them because people come from all over Central Texas to share plants with each other. And if you follow us on our Instagram and our Facebook page, you can find out when we do have those again some lovely day. This photo is of a urban veg class. This is me and our general manager Lindsay a couple years ago, and this is in our event space where there's all sorts of fun events when they happen, and we just really like to support our community. So we've done classes at Buzzmill before, and we helped them plant up their planters a couple years back, and we just love what they're doing over there with the lumber society, so we are happy to be involved. And this is my office, the back greenhouse where I do a lot of propagation, and our tree section. We hand painted these signs a couple years back, and all of our trees are on sale for 20% off right now. So if you're looking for some trees after this, you might want to head over there. So to start, you must think about your container. And a general rule for all containers, if you want to make your life easy, for the most part, if you're potting with soil, is that it must have proper drainage. And there are very few plants that will tolerate soggy, wet roots. Even plants that like to be moist and that are used to growing in moist areas need oxygen in the soil. So if you're not giving your plants good drainage, it's a very quick way to kill them. You can get a diamond drill bit and you can drill drainage holes in almost anything, with exception, I guess. You just really want to think about what the material is that you're planting into and its qualities. So some materials like terracotta are very porous and they breathe, and some materials like ceramic and glazed pots, that glaze really holds the moisture a lot longer, so you're gonna have a pot that holds moisture much longer if you choose a glazed pot. So sometimes you want a glazed pot. So it's just best to know, you got to match the properties of the pot with the plant and the plant's needs. So you can be creative, and I love to use lots of vintage containers, knickknacks, and found things. And if they don't have a hole in them, I'll show you what I do later. So this is just general. If you're using soil, you need a hole. I always tell people, with your plant, you really do want to consider the ease. Wherever you're going to put it, you want to consider how easy it's going to be to water. Because if you're hanging a plant and you hang it from a hook high on the ceiling, you're not going to want to get up there to get it down. You want to consider, like, if you just water it, and how are you going to water it? Sometimes if you use macrame, you can sneak a saucer in there under a pot. But a lot of my hanging pots, I have to just sit in a bowl and run water through them a couple times and let them sit in the bowl until they've absorbed enough water for me to hang them back up. So consider the ease of watering, because you don't really want to make your life harder than it already is. And then also just consider the silhouette that your plant will make in the pot and the proportions. So a lot of times if you plant a plant into a pot and it's really wide and you can see a lot of the soil, it's not going to look as good. So you just want to kind of have a plant and a pot that are proportional in size. And you can have fun with it. These are some vintage planters. These were just mugs that we found at a vintage store, and we just drilled holes in the bottom. And conveniently, our coworker Jessie just had a sweater that matched them. Terracotta, like I said, is very porous. It's great. You can see a lot of these are very large pots. They really do help with the heat. A lot of plants really like being in terracotta because it breathes, especially outside here. The fastest way to kill a plant is always to overwater it. So it really is hard to overwater plants in the heat of the summer in big pots like this. They do a kind of a good job just, being like a little sliver of a garden bed. They hold the water a lot longer being in a larger pot. So I mentioned ceramic and glazed pottery, so here's some examples of that. The blue glazed pots, they're pretty large, so they are going to hold water a little bit better than terracotta. So if you were growing palms and things that are more tropical and like water, glazed is a good option. If you're doing more cactus and succulents, usually terracotta is good. You can get away with either as long as you're managing your watering. And on the wall in the back there are some little staghorn ferns. So I threw this slide in here. It's really easy to mount your own staghorn fern. You kind of pull it out of the pot, shake away all the soil, pack sphagnum moss around the soil just kind of loosely, and then you find your wood, or you can mount it onto all sorts of things. And we just used screwed them in around the perimeter, and then kind of wrapped the moss and kind of held it on there with just fishing line. So it doesn't take very long at all. It's very easy. And staghorn ferns are an epiphyte, so you can water the leaves and they can drink water through their leaves. They're one of the few plants that can do that. The important thing to know if you are going to do this is you want to know which direction the shield is facing. You want the shield to face up and not down when you're finished, because that's going to affect how it grows. Lots of DIY videos on YouTube to do this too if you need more help. There's really specific videos you can watch to do this. So touching on terrariums and glass, we get asked a lot about these. And so this picture on the left is kind of our solution at Tillery to what to do with a terrarium. So we just put sand in it, and we put air plants in it, and we found that, you know, that way you can take your air plant out. You don't want it to be in direct sunlight because it really can cook it. But this is one of the best kind of uses for glass. I don't love planting in glass. I'm just looking at the comments for the first time. So hello from everyone all over the place, from Sydney and Tallahassee. Awesome. Thank you for bringing me the comments. So terrariums. The middle photo and the right photo I pulled from the internet. The right photo is from an unnamed big box store. This is photoshopped. They sell these glass globes, but these are just pictures of other large cactus that they cut and pasted onto this. So you can't really get these exact cactus to grow inside of a tiny terrarium. This is fake news. And the middle picture is an actual picture of like a plant that's kind of been stuffed into this small terrarium, and it looks kind of cool, but the roots of it have barely any soil in there, so it's gonna get dehydrated very quickly, and also if it's in any direct sunlight, it's gonna cook. We're in Texas where it's gonna be 105 degrees on Sunday. So if this is in direct sunlight, it is absolutely going to bake it. So that is the problem with most small containers. If you have them in direct sunlight, I would say I have hardly any small containers in direct sunlight that are smaller than like 8 inches wide. And that's just because it's really easy. Things get really hot and the roots can cook very easily. Even succulents and cactus. And a lot of people ask, so this is our gift shop on the left here, and a lot of people purchase and, you know, want to use these types of planters, baskets, cache pots, and macrames. And they can be really easy. You just want to be careful. Like, I wouldn't really put them inside. If they're wood or metal, you want to put a liner on the inside. You can get a cheap $2 plastic liner and it'll just sit under your plant. I have had those liners crack, so they can leak water if you're not looking down there paying attention. Don't be surprised if after a while they get old, but it does make it easy to just kind of get an instant, like, pop your plant into its basket with the liner, and it just looks so nice. And I do have some really nice metal baskets that I love, but if water gets on the inside, they kind of rust. So great effect there. I wouldn't recommend planting into metal. Just like I said, it's just going to rust. This picture on the photo I pulled from Instagram, and someone tagged us in it, and I thought this was a really good example of a photo to show you guys. So her pot doesn't have a hole. She just set her plant, her bird of paradise, down inside of the pot, and she's probably got a little liner in there, hopefully, and it's got nice sunshine on the leaves. I would call that direct light, which that plant would like a little bit of for sure. And, you know, other plants that are highlight plants like fiddly figs, you want to see some light on the leaves. I grow my fiddly fig outside in a western exposure, getting direct sun. It has a shade, but it gets a lot of direct sun, and it does great out there. So the biggest problem with a lot of houseplants is people aren't giving them enough light. So just a final list of things to consider when you're choosing your pot. And I chose this photo of this DIY chandelier because if you look at the plant in the back, you can see there is a cute little plant, but all of the dirt is kind of spilling up over the top of the pot. And so I'm sure they were just staging this photo, and they had the plant, they had to make it work for this photo. But if you actually were replanting your plant into a pot like this, the root ball is much too large for this tiny pot, and it's not going to live for very long. So you want to make sure that the root ball is proportional to the pot. You want to have at least an inch also from the top of the soil to the top of the pot, so that it creates a little bit of a bowl, and that way when you water it, the soil's not going to fly out everywhere, make a big old mess. It's just going to create a little bowl and drain down. When soil becomes hard, it's like a sponge, so it takes a second. And the older your soil gets, it becomes harder for the water to kind of percolate in if it gets more compact. Hello, Diane from Round Rock. And so you want to make sure you're breaking up your soil every now and then when it gets old. You want to use a chopstick or a fork, shove it down there, and just kind of loosen up the soil. That'll really help if you're noticing your water is just sitting on top of your soil for a long time. It needs a little bit of air down there. So don't do what these people did. This is not how you repot a plant. Exhibit A. You also would want to consider the weight. If you're hanging something, if you're using hooks, you need to make sure you're going into studs. You don't want any of your things to be crashing down on you. And you want to think about how your plant is going to drain. You want to think about the material of the pot versus what kind of plant you have. And you also want to think about where you're putting it and how much light is available there, because light is another important factor whether or not your plant is going to thrive. So you must survey your conditions. And so my backyard is west facing and full sun. There are some trees, I guess I would say. It gets direct sun until afternoon, and then it's shady in the afternoon on, which is actually really nice. It gives the plants a break from the hottest part of the day. So even plants like cactus and succulents need, a little bit of afternoon shade sometimes, or a little bit of extra water when it's 105 degrees. A lot of these plants, it doesn't even get that hot where they live. So we have kind of unique situation living here in Austin, Texas, where it gets down to 18 degrees sometimes, some winters, but it also gets up to 105 degrees some summers. So you have to have a plant that can handle both of those things, and if you're considering plants, I always tell people, if you're choosing a plant that goes dormant, either winter dormancy or summer dormancy, your pot is going to look like it's just got nothing in it for half of the year. So you do want to choose a plant that is going to be in it hopefully all year long, unless you're, tolerant or okay with having dormant plants. Some plants are just worth it, I think. So here's some selections of plants that I use for west-facing conditions. This is a big elephant bush I've had it for many years, and I got it from East Austin Succulents, who we share our nursery's lot with over at Tillery, and it's very confusing, I know, but there's two nurseries in one lot. So if you when we're open, if you go, everything on the left side is East Austin Succulents, everything on the right side and all the way back is Tillery. And I got this beautiful elephant bush from them, and I've had it for years. It's never given me any issues. So if you have a lot of sun, great, easy plant. Around it, there's some little echeverias, and at the bottom there's a little pencil cactus, which aren't 100% cold hardy. So a lot of succulents and cacti, they kind of are right on that line, so they'll die back if they freeze. So you do need to just be aware if they need to be protected in the winter time. And then the Portulaca moss rose is always really nice, like hanging plant. People do it in arrangements. It comes in a lot of pretty colors, and it's just a superstar in the summer. A lot of people come for columnar cacti or San Pedro or Bolivian torch cactuses, so that would be something our neighbor's East Austin Succulent sells. But I thought this was a really nice example of potting them up with terracotta, and they do the rocks to top dress them, makes them look nice. It kind of hides the soil, but it does make it harder to tell if the dirt is wet or dry. So sometimes if you're not sure, you really need to let these guys go a while without water. Let them dry out for sure. A lot of times people want to keep these in their houses, and I always tell them this plant needs light on all sides to stay growing straight up and down. So if it's not getting good light on all sides, it's either going to start growing weird. If it's not getting bright enough light, it can get very thin and spindly, and people will keep them in their house and it'll be fine for 2 years, and then one day it'll just fall over and they didn't know it had been rotting for months. So it is a challenge to keep cactus indoors. Indoors are much more similar to a tropical environment than a desert environment. So, humans and tropical plants are kind of a little bit better suited to live together. You can keep your cactus and your succulents outdoors. They do great on patios and porches and things, but you are going to kind of struggle a little bit keeping them inside. The Kalancha Mother of Millions, you could keep it inside. You can keep it anywhere. It's just such an unstoppable plant. I have this growing in so many pots because it just fell in. And then there's a blue elf aloe. There's a lot of different aloes that you can grow. Medicinal aloe, which is great. Not always 100% cold hardy. If you have a big plant, it'll usually die back and then regrow. But if you have a small plant, it could just completely melt if it freezes, especially in a hard freeze. So here's a nice picture from Central Texas Gardener, and they have a great YouTube channel. I have a shout out to them at the end. They do all sorts of education and videos, and they have a website, so you can find a lot of good information on plants from the Central Texas Gardener folks. So one more thing about cactus and succulents is they often have small roots. So this picture on the left is some Petalanthus that came in 5-gallon pots. They really should have come in a 1-gallon pot. This was much too large of a pot for this plant to come in. And the danger of potting in too large of a pot is that you can overwater your plants very easy. The small roots can't drink all of the water in the pot fast enough, and they will rot very quickly. So you really want to keep it proportional when you're repotting your cactus and succulents. And a lot of times for cactus and succulents, people will use very shallow bowls and wide bowls, and you can do an assortment of a variety of different kinds. This picture on the right is of a yucca and some little purslane flowers around the base of it, and that's another great easy little flowering succulent that we like a lot. So tomatoes. So we're kind of in the hottest part of the summer now. Most tomatoes stop producing once it's over 90 degrees. So depending on where you are, it might already be past that. And but it's not too late, so we kind of get 2 rounds of tomatoes here in Central Texas. And a lot of people will, keep their first round until, if they can keep them alive through this hot part of summer, they can cut them back by 1/3, and then they'll regrow and, be awesome for the second part of summer. So you do need to consider a trellis, what you're going to use to support. And I will say that most standard tomato cages that are sold in stores are not sufficient, and they will work at first, but if you are going to have anywhere near as many tomatoes as you should have, as you need for the investment, or as you should get, your tomato plant will eventually just take over that trellis. And so there's a lot of different options. I really like cattle panel trellises. I liked how these pictures looked with these trellises for more compact varieties, but tomatoes, like right now I have cherry tomatoes and they're still producing even though it's really hot, but they really are nice to just be able to walk out and grab a few off of the bush. So another thing you'll notice is these are pretty large pots. So you have 2 different types of tomatoes, and so you do need to know when you're buying your tomato, which type you have, because if you buy a determinate, you're buying a more compact or patio plant, it is going to be a smaller tomato, and you can get away with keeping it in a smaller pot. But I had one tomato in a smaller pot earlier this year, and that's the first one that didn't survive once it got really hot, whereas the ones in the bigger pots are doing just fine. It didn't have enough water in its smaller pot. So the determinants, they are a little smaller. They fruit all at once, but only one time. So if you keep watering this plant and putting money and energy into a plant that's already done fruiting, it's just a big waste of time. So it's really important if you get a determinate tomato just to know it. Most tomatoes will be labeled when you purchase them, and you should just make sure that you know what you're getting. So a lot of times, like Italian Roma, Celebrity, and Solar Fire, those are some determinate varieties. And Samara commented and said that her tomatoes definitely outgrew their first cage. And it's true, like I have one tomato that is in a cage right now, but it completely is half falling over, but it's supported by our fence. So, if the fence wasn't there, it would completely fall over. The trellis was helpful at first, but not anymore. So a lot of people prefer to grow indeterminate tomatoes that fruit all year long. We do have a long season. You can get tomatoes till almost like November, And you do want a little bit larger of a pot. If you can do 15 to 20 gallons. I do like the fabric pots. They probably dry out a lot faster. I haven't used any recently, but for how lightweight they are, that's nice. And I also do use just black plastic nursery pots just because they're free for me. But yeah, you can get a lot of good hybrids and Cherokee purples and black crims and sun golds. And with tomatoes, there are so many things. You could watch a whole half an hour video on how to get good tomatoes. So Polly says hers are getting taller, but there's no fruit. So yeah, they won't be setting fruit. If you're fertilizing with a high nitrogen, you're going to get a lot of growth, but you're not going to get the blooms and the flowers. So it's a matter of fertilizing with the right fertilizer at the right time. You do kind of switch as things change gears. And I have a recommendation at the end of the video, and she has a great tomato video. So if you go watch her tomato video with all of the specifics, you can get some more good information. They are heavy feeders. They're doing a lot of work making all this food for us. So you do need to fertilize them heavy, and it does help to mulch them. That will help keep the moisture in longer. So just putting around the top like hay or hardwood mulch, it is going to make a difference. So peppers, this is our pup Hank and our shishito peppers, and this was over a month ago, so the peppers are much larger now. This was 3 peppers in at least an 8-gallon pot, I would say, maybe even over a 10. And I would not put, I would give each pepper at least a 5-gallon pot to maximize your bounty. So they are heat loving. It does take a while in the spring to get going before the peppers really kick in. So sometimes people do seeds, but it's cheap to get a start to, and usually you don't need the whole pack of seeds. So some peppers are semi-perennial, like a chili pekin. They'll grow in the ground here very easily, and if you did do it in a pot, you could just protect it from the freeze and it won't die back to the ground, and you can grow it year after year. And you can do this with some other, like I think jalapenos. I think the spicy peppers for sure you can do this with. I'm not sure about the bell peppers, and I've never tried it with shishitos, but just cutting them back in the winter and keeping them inside, and that way next spring, once they come out of dormancy, they're already good to go, and they can make lots of peppers early on for you. So overwintering is a good trick for peppers. And I love these shishitos. We just ate some of them a couple nights ago. They're so easy. So citrus is another great thing to grow anywhere. Even here it freezes. So we do have to protect them by either wrapping them or pulling them into the garage, or we only have some small ones right now, but we just pull them in usually if it's going to be really cold. And even with varieties, like I used to have a frost hardy satsuma, and I planted it in the ground where I lived thinking, oh, it's called frost hardy, but it still died back to the ground. And you have to be careful with a lot of citrus and all fruit trees if they do die back to the ground, because a lot of them are grafted. So this means they take the fruit stock, they take the roots of one healthy plant that can maybe withstand a colder temperature than the traditional Meyer lemon, and then they take the Meyer lemon and then they'll graft it onto it. And so if your plant dies all the way back to the ground, you might have it regrow as the roots, as the original fruit stock, and your Meyer lemon might have died. So you just have to be careful if you're getting, like, I think most citrus are grafted. A lot of different fruit trees are grafted, and it's just good to know that if it does die back all the way to the ground, it may not come back true as it originally was sold to you. So protect them from the freezes. Also feed them heavily. They also need pretty large pots as they get bigger to stay happy. And a lot of butterflies eat their leaves. I'll just throw in there. You'll see a lot of caterpillars eating them sometimes because they're a host plant for a lot of butterflies. So sometimes people like that, sometimes people don't. So there's a lot of herbs that you can do in the sun, and I will say like a lot of herbs, even in the sun, they appreciate afternoon shade. They can handle morning sun, but not so much afternoon shade. Paul is asking if I've grown any from seed. Any citrus from seed? I have not. I think it works though. I think that you can grow citrus true to their parents, but I have to double check that. I have not done that. So herbs for sun. Basil is great. It does need a good amount of water. I'm watering mine almost daily right now because it's really hot and it's getting a lot of sun even in its large pot. So this is Italian basil, great for pestos. And we also sell a lot of Thai basil and Tulsi basil, which make beautiful flowers. The African blue basil too makes great flowers, and the pollinators really love them. But with the Italian basil, you really don't want to let it flower. So we're going to talk a little bit more about bolting later, but basically you want to pinch off the flowers anytime you see them because they are going to make the taste of the basil change. And as the basil ages too, it might be that it doesn't taste as good. So this might be something you start from seed a little bit like once every month, so you always have some fresh. You always have a little bit more coming, or you just start again later in the season. You get some new starts, so it might be something you have to refresh. And then fennel and dill, the butterflies love it, and lemongrass is another easy one, but not always cold hardy, doesn't always come back after the freeze. Rosemary and lavender are great in containers, but you do have to have a large container, and they do really want to dry out between waterings. So what I see happening a lot is people buying a small 4-inch plant for $2, putting it in a small $4 or $5 pot, and then having a lot of trouble keeping it alive because they'll put it in the sun and then it cooks within 2 days, and it's a plant that wants to dry out. So it just it doesn't do well. It's not going to do well to do rosemary or lavender in a small pot. So here's an example on the right. This is like a pretty large planter full of lavender, and it is nice and it looks great. I believe it blooms in the winter, so it's a flower for the bees when there's not a lot of other flowers around. And then there are a lot of different types of lavender, and there's a few different types of rosemary. There's upright rosemary, and then there's a trailing rosemary. With lavender, I've also seen online things saying like put lavender in your bedroom for sleeping, help you sleep at night. It's relaxing, which is also fake news. It is not going to survive indoors. These plants need full sun. They need some hours every day of full sun. If they're grown in the shade, they're going to grow towards the light, and they're not going to grow round. They're going to grow in a funny shape. So you do need to give them just as good a bright a light as you can, and then you got to get the watering right. So they got to dry completely, but the pot has to be big enough so they're not just cooking in the sun. The roots aren't getting, over 100 degrees cooking. So sage also, all of those are easy to overwater, so just let them dry out between waterings. If they start to look droopy, they're thirsty. If you have shade, you can do an English lavender. English lavender is going to be very different than Spanish lavender. Okay, so different climates. You can get a lavender or a rosemary that'll do better by trying different varieties. So starting with seeds. So there are a lot of benefits to starting seeds. You can get a lot more options, more variety, and they're cheap. Usually you can get a packet of seeds for $2 to $3, and you have a bunch of seeds versus one start. So with some things you can just make a much larger punch. With a lot of like arugula, my leafy greens, things that I want to have a lot of, like if I bought one arugula plant, I would never get a salad. So I gotta be doing succession seeding. I gotta be throwing seeds out every other week so that there's always more coming. So if you're growing seeds, you can pre-soak them in seaweed. You just make a little bit of a diluted seaweed mixture and you let them hang out overnight. and some seeds will start to germinate even after 1 day. And then you want to make sure that you're planting them into moist soil at the correct depth. So that means however wide your seed is, twice as deep as that. So if you have a tiny little seed that's like 1 millimeter wide, you basically are just going to be broadcasting it over the soil and then watering it in. You want to have, good soil, and it's nice, light, and airy, and you just sprinkle it over, tamp it down slightly. You don't want to push all the air out, and then water it in. And you want to water gently, and you don't want it to dry out. So if you water too roughly, the water can definitely push the soil and the seeds and out of the pot and just splash them out, make a big mess, and then your seeds are lost. So water gently, don't let them dry out. They're delicate, and you have to protect them while they're little, because wind can hurt them. Even just like hitting them with a water hose and then they get stuck down in the soil can hurt them. You have to make sure they're not laying down in the soil or they can rot. So a lot of other seeds, some seeds will not germinate if they're too hot or too cold. I know carrots are one of these. If the temperature's not right, they won't germinate. And it's good to choose varieties for your area, because it's kind of the problem with having so many seed varieties to choose from is you don't really know, or sometimes you can look it up on like davesgarden.com. You can see the areas that a plant is grown, where people report growing that plant. So if you look up your plant and no one is growing it in your area, it tells you at least that you're taking on a challenge. And if it doesn't work out, there's probably a reason. So a lot of times people take on things because you just don't know what's possible. And that's kind of cool, because I really like to try growing all sorts of weird things and things that don't normally grow here. So sometimes you just have random luck, and it's fun to experiment. I always encourage experimenting with the garden. So I love starting with seeds. You can also start from a rhizome. So you can grow ginger and turmeric in a container. And it's not hard. I usually like to start in the very early spring, once it's warm enough to be growing things outside, like March. We're past any risk of frost. And I went and I bought my ginger here on the left, and I just soaked it in water for a couple days, and it started to get kind of like puffed up a little bit, like with water, more hydrated, and then the little sprouts kind of grew off of the sides and started to grow, and I just planted it into the soil after that. So this picture on the bottom is what ginger looks like growing in pots, and mine outside looks just like that now. And you can do the same thing with turmeric. You can just get some from the store and grow it, and it does take over 5 months. So that's a long time. So if you started like now, July, August, September, October, November, December. So if you started right now, you might get a small harvest. You could overwinter your harvest and harvest next year, but you have to keep your rhizome alive all winter. So they're a tropical plant. They like it hot. The leaves and the foliage might die back. As long as the rhizome is alive under the soil and not rotting, not staying too wet, or not freezing, it's going to live. So if you can protect that rhizome, you can get a nice big harvest eventually. And I've done this in the ground, I've done this in pots. Starting early in the winter, I harvest it in November, and then I have a big batch of it. And it's not the same as having it dried from the store. It's like fresh ginger and fresh turmeric, so it's a little different, but it's still great for juices and things. And it makes a beautiful flower. If you ever get it to flower, you're very lucky. You're keeping it very happy. So I've only ever seen it flower like once. So some greens that I love to do are, on the left here is a sorrel, green sorrel. It's delicious. It tastes lemony. You can get starts. I think you can get seeds too. It's just less common, but it's one of the better ones in our heat. And Anu asks, can you use ginger from a grocery store? So the answer is you can. You want to try to get organic if you can. But I've always just bought it from my local grocery store. I don't even think this one was organic, and it's growing great. It's seems like it's going fine. So yes, you can get any ginger from the grocery store. So yeah, here on the right is some chard, and also has beautiful colors. Also better in the heat than a lot of the other leafy greens, like lettuce doesn't do so well in our heat. Spinach doesn't do as well when it gets really hot like this. Even the arugula doesn't love it super hot, and it bolts easily. So these do a little bit better. In the summer, you can do all sorts of vegetables for pots, and you can look this up on by month. If you Google like the calendar, the Aggie's calendar, they have like a planting guide month by month of what you plant. In the winter, you can do kales and broccolis and carrots. I love to do arugulas. I have some beets right now still in a large pot that I was eating the greens from, and are still kind of small, but I'm about to harvest them. I planted them a while back, and they've pretty much stopped growing, so I think they're ready. And then I wanted to mention again succession sowing, which is just sowing. You know, maybe you have one big plot and you break it up into quarters, and in one quarter you plant 1 week, and then the second week you plant behind it, and the third week you plant next to it, and then the fourth week you plant in that first quarter, and you can start harvesting from the fourth quarter, and you harvest from the first. So you're basically rotating around, but you're always planting, so you always have more fresh coming, and that's great, like I said, with greens, anything you need a lot of. So moving to shade perennials. So these are just some plants that I love for outdoors in the shade in a nice big pot. I've had them in the ground also, and the asparagus ferns on the left, I don't even know if they really need to be covered. I've covered them in the winter, and they've always been fine, but I don't even know if they need it. I think if it was like a hard freeze, they would like to be covered. But the ligularia on the right can handle it. I've had it and never needed to cover it. Even when it gets really cold, it always comes back. And they will survive a light freeze. They don't go dormant, so they don't look empty. They don't make your pot look empty if they go dormant. So these are some plants on the left here that I have on my front porch, which is eastern facing. So my eastern facing means it gets morning sun. So the morning sun can be kind of hot. These plants still need a good amount of water. These in the pot on the left in the brown pot are caladiums. And then to the left of that, the little round flowers are nasturtiums. With the orange flowers with the round leaves are nasturtiums. So those guys, they're kind of they don't love the heat. Like right now, they're just kind of hanging in there, but I grew those from the winter time. So I love those. They're just a cute little annual. You can get them for $2 at the store, and they are one of my favorites, the nasturtiums. The caladiums too are another favorite of mine. So they are another rhizome, like a bulb, and if it dies back all the way to the ground and you have that soil and give the right conditions, you can regrow that plant. They do go winter dormant sometimes. So they come in a lot of beautiful colors, as you can see from the other two photos with the red in them, and they're very striking. And you can see like the picture on the right, they also have some flowers in there and a little vinca vine, and they also put an asparagus fern in there. So you can mix these plants together as long as you're mixing plants that need the same light and the same water. They can be friends. So these are great for just instant color, and if you pop the flowers in there, you can attract a lot of pollinators with annuals. So annuals only live for one season. Sometimes you can sneak them in. Like I said with the nasturtium, it was a winter annual, but I snuck it into the summer, but it's not really looking that great, so it's not going to really look good too much longer. I'll probably get rid of it pretty soon, and then you replace it. So annuals you replace every season or every year. Coleus is a great annual for the summer especially, and it comes in so many great colors. This is the middle top one is like the under the sea variety, which does look to me like a seahorse should be in there. All sorts of great colors and flowers. I will warn you that mealybugs love them, but if you're keeping them outside, it's not as much of a problem. You just got to keep an eye out for them. So zinnias and oxalis are another great option. I do like to do zinnias from seeds, so I can get a really big batch of them, like a big, bush of them like this. And on the left here is some little zinnias I did earlier this season. I can't remember the name of them, but they didn't live for very long. They're not there anymore, I don't think. Once it got hot, they kind of petered out, but I still have the little oxalis that's next to them. So oxalis is another little rhizome. It comes in a lot of different colors. A lot of people call it shamrock. It comes in purple and green, and it's another easy plant. People try to keep it inside as a house plant, but it's not as easy. It's a lot easier outside. Tropicals. I love tropicals for potted plants. So on the left, the fiddly figs. Like I said, I keep mine outside, but it's a very popular indoor plant. Nobody keeps it in enough light. I shouldn't say that. A lot of people have issues with this plant because it's not in enough light. It is a drama queen, and that is just the most common issue that people have with it, is not enough light, not enough humidity is another thing. Cordylines are on the three pictures on the right, and I love these because they come in so many great colors, and they just grow everywhere. If you go anywhere like Central America, I was in Costa Rica, and they just grow everywhere, and they're so vivid and bright and beautiful. So on the right, on the top, that's a pink diamond cordyline, and there's just so many. They really do have a great variety of great colors. So alocasias are another favorite of mine, and they do great in the outdoor shade. Sometimes they're definitely sold as a houseplant, but they do get spider mites very easily indoors. So a lot of mine live outside. If I bring them in, they might hang out inside for a little while, and then usually they go back outside, and that just keeps them looking their best. So they like to stay moist, not soggy. They're another rhizome, so if they die back to the soil and it looks like your plant is dead and you dig it up and it's just a tuber in there, but it's firm and it's not rotten, it's not all squishy, it's still alive in there, and usually you can regrow them. So they do go dormant sometimes. They do like really high humidity. They're great outside here. It's humid here. So this is another #1 plant that we love, a Monstera deliciosa. And these guys, picture on the left is from our greenhouse, picture on the right is from the jungle. So they grow high up in the canopy, and if you are getting one, you need to think about how you're going to trellis it, because it will climb along the ground if it doesn't have a tree to climb up. So definitely one of the most popular. I really love this as a plant more than the fiddly fig because it's just so much easier and people don't have as many problems with it. And that fiddly fig has given people headaches. Ever since I've worked at Tillery, I've had to answer the question of what's wrong with my fiddly fig, and I've probably answered it 100,000 times. So it just gives people headaches, so that makes me not like it. I wanted to introduce to you guys Leeka, because Leeka is a kind of a new medium. It's an alternative to soil, and it makes things easy if you are growing in a pot that doesn't have a hole. So I have this plant. It's actually sitting in the same room as me. I'm looking at it right now, and I took this plant and washed away all its soil, and I put it down into this pot with these little balls of expanded clay aggregate. Lightweight expanded clay aggregate, or hydroton is what it's called. And they basically wick the water from the base up to the top. So you put about a half an inch or so of water in the bottom. You just keep a little bit. It depends on the container and it depends on the roots, but I'll fill up the water to where the roots start. So they're reaching down into the water as they grow. And then you get a good root system established, and you can keep it as houseplants. This plant, I never have to, I only check the water like once every couple weeks, and I just make sure it's not out of water. If it starts to look droopy, I check in, make sure it didn't run out of water. And it prevents the plant from getting overwatered, which means I can keep it in a little bit lower light without having any issues. So I do have a video of how to move a plant into leca, and this is some roots of a plant that I brought back, I imported. And on the right, I have an alocasia black velvet, and I washed away all the soil and I made a video. So if you go to Tillery Street Plant Company's Instagram, we have an Instagram IGTV video, and it's a short video just how to transfer your plant into leca. And there's more videos on YouTube. It's not too hard to get your hands on leca. We sell it through the store too, and it is a great medium. So I would say, if you have some plants that you're willing to experiment with, I would recommend it, because it really is a nice way to, it's a really nice alternative to soil. So in addition to that, I also like to do houseplants in water, so hydroponic houseplants. And you can do cuttings of most vining plants, and it just is really impossible to overwater them. It is important, once it's a fresh cutting, before it's grown roots, to keep it in bright light while the initial roots are developing. But once it has a good set of initial roots in the water, you can move it into lower light situations. You can kind of push it. So it's nice. There's no fungus gnats. If you're worried about mosquitoes, we sell another product called mosquito bits or dunks. It used to be dunks, and now they made it into a new thing called bits. And you can sprinkle these little bits. It's a natural bacteria that won't harm your plants. I use it all outside around my house too, to try to keep the mosquitoes, because it helps to kill the larvae of mosquitoes, and specifically the fly family. So it's not harmful. You can put it in bird baths. You can put it outside. There are no plants that if you grow them, they will keep mosquitoes away. So that's the solution if you're trying to keep mosquitoes away. So back to hydroponic, it's also very low maintenance. So bottom watering is a great way to water. So not all plants can be bottom watered. Plants that have shallow root systems like succulents aren't necessarily, they're not gonna like being bottom watered. And bottom watering is really for plants that are, if you're not sure how much to water, just by sitting it so where it can absorb the water through the bottom hole of the pot, it's going to drink up the right amount through capillary action. It's going to suck up the right amount of water, so it's not going to get overwatered. You don't want to leave it sitting in the water for longer than probably a couple hours. So you don't ever want your plants to have water sitting in their saucers, because that can be bad for them long term. But it is an okay way to water, and then pull them out and let them get almost back to dry. So misting. So should I mist my plants? The answer usually is you don't have to. If you try to mist plants indoors, they can get fungal issues much more commonly. I do use a mister to water some of my plants indoors that are in small containers, because I can just control how much of the water is flowing in. But misting outside, I wouldn't. I don't really think you need to do it. It's already humid outside. So most of the time, I would say you don't really have to mist too much unless you like to do it. Soils, you can use, these are some of our favorites, Fox Farm and Happy Frog. These are potting soils. So if you're planting pots into a pot, they go into a potting soil. There's a lot of different kinds you can get. They're not all made equally though. So you want to look and see what's in your soil. And if you're doing vegetables, you probably want maybe an organic soil, or you just at least want to be more mindful of what you're putting onto your plants. So we like anything that you like mix into your soil. A lot of times people ask about should they mix their own soil. So you can mix your own soil. You really don't have to though, unless it's kind of like a lot of trouble. If you're not sure about it, you really don't need to. The only thing you really need to mix in there is perlite. So perlite is this little volcanic rock. If you're planting succulents or cactus, you do need a cactus or succulent potting mix. So that's going to have much better drainage, more materials for rock, sand. It's just going to hold less water and drain faster. The orchid mix is great if you are planting an orchid. It's this bark on the left in the little green tub. And the moss, sphagnum moss, in the basket on the right is another good medium for some of the tropicals. So NPK, you don't have to get too complicated with it. The nitrogen is going to help the green leaves to grow. The P, the phosphorus, is going to help with the fruiting and the flowering. And the K, the potassium, is going to help your roots to grow healthily. So you have to know, you have to use the right fertilizer at the right time. I kind of mentioned this earlier. So you wouldn't want to promote fruiting or flowering by giving a high phosphorus fertilizer to a basil, for example, because you don't want your Italian basil to make a flower. So why would you promote that? So you can give it something higher in nitrogen to help the green growth, but you don't want to help the flowers. So bat guano is one good option. Worm castings is another good option for our organic fertilizers. They are a little bit on the pricier side, so sometimes I just use turkey compost. You can get a much larger bag, top dress around the base of your plants. You don't want to touch your plants. I've never had any issues, but best practice is just top dress it around your plants and then water it in, and all of that nutrients will go down and feed all of your plants. So plants also need vitamins. So fish fertilizer is a great one. It's made from byproducts of the fishing industry and like bones and fish skins. It is stuff that's not going to be used otherwise, and it's organic. So it's not going to burn your plants, and it's going to really help improve the health of your soil. It also has a lot of secondary nutrients. And then liquid seaweed is my number one. I use this almost every time I water my most precious plants. It has no nitrogen and no phosphorus. It's just going to help the roots to be really healthy, and it has a lot of necessary hormones, vitamins, minerals, enzymes. It's basically like a multivitamin for your plant. So you could give it a little bit in water every day. You dilute it 1 ounce per gallon, and this is just going to keep your plants really healthy. They're going to be able to go into hotter temperatures, colder temperatures. They're going to have more buds, greater yields of fruit, more vigorous growth, more nutrients in the plant to put into the fruits. Your soaked seeds will germinate faster. They've done so many studies, like if they give one seedling the seaweed and they don't give the other one, it's just crazy how much better it does. So the liquid seaweed is a really amazing thing to use for your plants. Also, seaweed is very sustainable. It grows like 50 feet a day, so there's no way we're going to run out of it. It's just a great resource. You should learn how to use a foiler to do a foiler feed. So you're basically just putting it in a spray bottle, spraying it on the leaves of your plant early in the morning or in the afternoon, and it's gonna, when the pores are open, and then it's gonna absorb it through the pores, and it can really take in a lot more nutrients this way. So when you actually have to repot your plant, you this here on the left is 2 little kales I planted in one pot, and this pot is 8 inches wide and about 8 inches deep, but you can see all of the thick roots at the base of the pot were growing in the shape of the pot, so they're very root bound. And on the top right picture is another plant that is very classically known for getting root bound. So there are a lot of symptoms of a plant that is going through this. They will be extra thirsty. They will need more water. They might look more wilted. They might not be growing and look stunted like this kale on the left. All spring long, it just stayed this size. And I didn't realize I just was keeping it in much too small of a pot. So it'll look maybe like the roots on the top on the right. And then right below that is what it should look like when you repot it. So Lauren says her aloe looked like the one on the top right. So plants do get very root bound, and you have to comb through those roots like you're combing through hair and make them hang freely so they're no longer in the shape of the pot. And then when you pot them up, you don't want to put a tiny root ball in a huge pot. You want the pot to be proportional to the size of the roots, like I mentioned earlier. So you don't want to have a huge plant with a huge pot with a tiny plant, or a tiny pot with a huge plant root ball. All right, so make it proportional. And I mentioned bolting. So this top left picture is cilantro. As soon as it starts to get hot, this happens with the cilantro. It starts to make flowers, and the bees love it, and it goes to seed, and it becomes coriander. But it no longer tastes good like cilantro. So at that point, you can let the bees have it, or you can save the seeds. They definitely happen due to stress and heat. So a lot of the cabbage family, the cruciferous veggies will do this. Here's just a few little bugs that you should be aware of. The mealy bugs are pretty common. They are little fuzzy guys that will kind of hide in the crevices of plants. Scale is another very common plant pest, and if you look at that picture on the bottom, it almost looks like the mealy bugs. So that white stuff on the leaf is the scale eggs, and when it's immature, that's what it looks like, and it hides around the base of the plant. And then once it matures, it becomes like the top picture, the scale little brown guy, and it just gets scraped off. They're gross. They're really gross. And then spider mites are another very common one. They sometimes look like spider webs. They lay these little eggs on the top of the leaf, and they feel very dusty. So if you swipe your hand over the top of the leaf and rub your fingers together, it'll feel like a thin dust is on them. So all of these can be somewhat managed with insecticidal soap. You can get a little bit more hardcore using like an organicide, or we treat everything naturally over at Tillery, but there are different methods, but you do have to be just kind of on it if you do have any of these bugs. You got to treat it fast before it spreads. Quarantine plants. It's always best practice to quarantine new plants when you take them home, because even though we, like we're in quarantine now, even though we, do our best, we treat the plants every week at Tillery, the bugs still find places to hide, and you can never be 100% bug free. You'll never eradicate them. You just have to manage them. So we never want to sell plants with bugs. We always pull them when we find them, but sometimes we don't see them until it's too late. So always look very good when you're buying new plants. So this is a warning of, if you grow kale, you will have these cabbage loopers. They are gross. They look like this. They will eat your whole plant in one day. And the eggs are that little yellow scale on the left. You can go in and scratch off the eggs before they hatch, or else you have to go in and usually I just pick them off by hand, because with caterpillars you can't spray anything unless it's BT on them, which is the same thing that kills the mosquitoes. It'll kill these caterpillars too. So that is about it. Hello, Lee from Austin. If anybody has any last questions now, I'll take some more questions, and I have a few just recommendations for y'all. So Central Texas Gardener on YouTube, they have great videos. I did a video, I've done 2 videos with them now. They came out to my house and where I used to live last year, so you can see my old bedroom and all the plants that I had there. And I also recommend the Grow Green Guide, which is put out locally. I can't remember who puts it out, but you could just Google Grow Green Guide. I'm sure it'll come up. Austin, it'll come up. And it has just all of the well-adapted native plants for our area. And then Roots and Refuge on YouTube. She's the one who has the great video on tomatoes. She does garden walks like every week, and she has just everything growing. She's in a similar climate, I think maybe Arkansas, but she's in a similar zone as we are. And then Epic Gardening on YouTube, he's great. He has lots of short little videos. And then I also really recommend, I see the questions coming in, so I'll get to those at the very end. So I also recommend the Facebook groups. So if you just search Gardening 101 in Central Texas, or vegetable gardening in Central Texas, there's a few I think that I'm in, and it's just people in this area all sharing experiences and pictures and asking questions, and there's a lot of knowledge to be found there. So, and then finally, our website is tillerystreetplants.com. Everything is curbside pickup right now. We just started shipping plants to other places of the United States. Today was our very first day, so you can have there is a page of plants that are available for shipping. And if you use the coupon code BUZZ for the month of July, you can get 15% off your orders. So let's look at these questions. So Nick says, can I talk about why new leaves will grow curly or crinkled? So when I see this happening, I have to inspect a few things. So first, if it's indoors, I check the humidity and if it's a plant that wants higher humidity, because new leaves will unfurl damaged if the humidity is not high enough. If this happens outdoors, I check that there's no bugs hiding, because I have had plants with pest damages. They'll start to grow disfigured leaves. And also just if the light is not quite right, I've kind of seen it. So there can be different things that will cause this. It kind of depends on what the plant is. Anu says, can you use the soap water or neem water for the worms? So for worms, the soapy water, insecticidal soap, will not work on a caterpillar. And neem will not work. Neem, if I'm correct, it's been a minute since I was reading about neem, but it only will kill bugs in their larval phases. It basically inhibits their growth. So if it's already a full-grown bug and you're spraying it with a neem, it's not going to affect it the same as if it was a young bug. So the neem doesn't always work as well. We don't use that very much around Tillery. But for the worms, you have to use a BT spray. So it has to be specifically for caterpillars. We get the webworms in our trees a lot too. We have to spray them up high into the trees to get the webworms out. But you do need to use a BT if you have the worms. And if you have the caterpillars, honestly, hand picking them off too is another really easy way. It's gross, but it's easy. Good rule of thumb for a pot proportional to the root ball. Like, should it be a certain number of inches wider or deeper? So this is a great question. So because I did say multiple times, use a large pot. So if you have a pot that is more than 2 feet wide, you're essentially making a miniature garden, raised garden. So you can, if you have a huge pot, like more than 2 feet wide, you can put a couple small root balls into it, and then when you water, you just let it dry out between watering. But if you're only planting one plant into one single pot, probably don't want to go, most plants don't want more than like 2 to 3 inches on all sides. And if it's a tropical plant, you can get away with it. If it's a plant that likes moisture, you can get away with it, but it's riskier with the plants that have smaller root systems and succulents and cactus. So that's why a lot of those times you'll see like a really wide cactus succulent planter that's shallow, so it holds a lot less moisture. So why Chinese money plant leaves are yellowing? So it could be a number of things. You have to be a sleuth when you have a plant that starts having issues. So you have to figure out, is it enough light? Those guys don't need the brightest light, but they don't want to be too far from a window either. And then they do want to kind of dry out between waterings. So it is hard to say They can turn yellow if they're not getting enough water too. A moisture meter, I don't know if I mentioned, but moisture meters are really good tools if you're not sure how much to water. You can stick this little probe down in the soil and it tells you when it's completely dry. So it'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 10. So, you know, some plants like to stay on the drier side, some on the wetter side, but all plants get watered the same. They all get soaked, even cactus succulents. You all soak them. So, humidity is Nika's issue for the money tree. Yeah, we have a money tree that's outside, and I do think it does like a little bit higher humidity. I think that they're called Pachira aquatica, so they're almost like an aquatic swamp tree, and ours is getting really big this year. So, do I use?
Soak it, the better it gets.
He says the more he soaks it, the better it gets. So Allison asks, do I use fertilizer and liquid seaweed both? So the answer to that is yes, I do, and it stinks. So if you use fish emulsion, it stinks. So if you use it inside, you might not want to do that, but it really gives your plants like so much good nutrients. So I mix seaweed, liquid seaweed, and fish emulsion, and I give that to all of my most precious favorite plants that I want to baby, and they love it. They grow so much better. I watched a YouTube video on, you know, taking 3 plants, one gets only seaweed, one gets only fish emulsion, and one gets both. And the one that got both grew way faster. So it just gives it the combination of like the really healthy roots and also the nitrogen from the fish. So it's good to do both. And then Samara says, planted bell peppers from seed in a 7-gallon grow bag, 1 sprout in each quadrant. Do you need to put them each into their own pot now? So if you have a 7-gallon grow bag and you have 1 sprout, I'm not sure how large a quadrant is, but I would say you probably don't want more than like 3 in a 7-gallon bag. So you could just move a couple of the little ones, just scoop down under, try not to disturb the roots, and see if you can scoop them up and repot them into their own little pots or another big pot together. So it looks like that is all of the questions. Oh, seaweed and fish emulsion for houseplants or only outdoors? I use it on my houseplants, and I use the seaweed on the leaves of the plants and in the soil, and if it's real thick, it can leave a little bit of brown spots. You might have to rinse off later, but I do use it on my houseplants if you can tolerate the smell. Some people really don't like it. So, but your plants love it. They will love you. So if you guys have more questions, you guys can hit me up over at Tillery's Instagram, and I hope that you guys get some cool plants with this coupon code. And huge thanks to Buzzmill for having us on. We love what they're doing over there. And plant plants. So Maria says, do you have to use rainwater or filtered water? You don't have to, but some plants are gonna look better if you do. So at our nursery, we use almost tap water on everything. So really the majority of plants will do fine with tap water. At home, I do collect little rainwater and I use it on my plants, and that does help. But you got to use what you got. So sometimes people, you know, will buy distilled water from the store for their Venus flytrap. So it's just a matter of how much you're willing to do. So all right, y'all, I hope you have a great weekend, and happy planting. Let's see if I can get out of this now. That's the sad news. Goodbye, everybody.